Welcome to The Grant, the EU funding podcast. My name is Niels Tudor Winter, and I am the creator, editor, and host of The Grant. The Grant is an independent, non-commercial podcast initiative with the ambition to dig into all corners of the EU R&D funding system on topics of interest for the full EU R&D funding community. I use LinkedIn a lot to pick up my guests for the show. Some time ago I noticed a nice post from a guy called Sean Jones that posted a video interview called Thought Leaders as part of the communication strategy of an EU project. It was a quite different communication approach than I'm used to, both myself and to see others do, so I reached out to Sean for an interview. And it showed that Sean is an enthusiastic guy focused on doing communication and dissemination activities with a big focus on real values and not copy-paste his approaches as many others they do. He has even formed his own NGO with exactly this focus. In other words, Sean has a big heart for this, and it became a very nice talk with some sharp edges along the way towards the backspine practices. Please enjoy. Grant. Welcome to the Grant podcast, the EU funding podcast. After slowly finishing the written proposal sections in the timeline series, I am now having another guest on board today. So it's going to be a little bit an appendix that's gonna continue as I move on. Appendix to the timeline series, where I will have a guest on board to get into more detail about different aspects of different sections of the proposal preparation. Without further ado, Sean, welcome.
Thank you very much, Niels. My name is Sean Jones. From the Barcelona-based non-profit association More Perfect Union.
Yeah, Sean. Welcome. And Sean, we as I do a lot with my guests, we hooked up on LinkedIn, right?
We did.
And my discourse there on hunting people down is when I see something interesting is going on, I immediately write a message or connect, and then start to massage people to see if they want to join this. And we've been actually in a dialogue for a while now, because it's all a matter of timing when you have it, when it's a spare time initiative as I'm having. So we had to cancel an appointment and so on. But anyways, the reason why I noticed you was because you had some podcast. There was something that you recorded. So it was a video interview, something like that.
Yes, I was doing as part of a pre-deadline commercial activity for an Horizon Europe Innovation Action. With the consortium, we were the dedicated communication and dissemination partners in this consortium. And what we did was a paid LinkedIn campaign in which we interviewed some of the thought leaders in the consortium and out of the consortium as well. It was a call regarding energy efficiency in smart buildings, dealing with digital twinning and machine learning, essentially. So there are some very smart people there, and we presented them as thought leaders in a new website that we spun off from our own website called environmentaleu.org. And so what you would have seen was a clip from those whole videos that are on environmentaleu.org on LinkedIn. And I think you liked one of the videos, and then you said hello, and then we started talking.
Yeah, because I noticed that it was a good way of disseminating, make communication around the project. So of course, I thought, what's this? And so I reached out, and we've been having some nice exchanges. You've been sending me a lot of thoughts and reflections. No one of my former guests have been sending me so many reflections and thoughts. And immediately I thought, well, this guy, he has an opinion about things.
I apologize.
No, there's no apology, because those are the best guests. It's also an opinion-driven podcast. This one, not only is it generic episodes, it's also, I also want to get something on the table there with that's opinionated. That's where people they have an attitude, not an attitude, but where they have reflected and have based on experience and knowledge about the system, they have an opinion about how things work and so on. So that, of course, that intrigued me even more. So we've been discussing a little bit about what to do in our first episode. And we agreed on dealing with the dissemination, communication, exploitation parts of the proposal, because that's something that you experience a lot of experience in dealing with. So that, but before we get so far, let's just have the formalities right that I do with everybody. So first, Sean, short introduction of yourself and how you have been working with EU R&D proposals or EU funding until now.
Okay. Well, like I said, my name is Sean Jones. I was born in the United States. My father is Irish. My mother is American. I grew up in Hong Kong until I was 11. I studied clarinet performance, classical music, in the University of Michigan. And then I moved to Europe. I immigrated to Europe. I'm an immigrant in Spain. And I kind of fell into the EU funding sector, basically because in Spain, all the jobs I've ever gotten have been because I speak and write English well. The level of English in Spain isn't very high, I think, because of the television, honestly. That's another subject for another day, but it's overdubbed. And so all the jobs I've gotten have been related not to my clarinet skills, but to my English skills. And I got hired by a company that was an engineering company that applied for EU funding back in FP7, Research for the Benefit of SMEs, if you remember that program.
Of course.
I worked for that company for 5 years. I worked as a freelance consultant in the equivalent of Research for the Benefit of SMEs over the years in Horizon 2020, Horizon Europe, the AAC Accelerator.
Yep.
And then 2 years ago, I decided to become my own boss and start a nonprofit organization because I thought there were a lot of problems with the EU funding sector and the European Union in general that could be addressed by better communication. And that's our thing, communication. We're not experts we're not a marketing agency per se. We're not experts in marketing, but we're experts in pragmatism and getting stuff done. So these are transferable skills that we apply to helping the EU not go down in flames because of bad institutional communication.
That's a lot of weight you put on your shoulders there.
Yeah, well, I do what I can. But yeah, no, I mean we're mission driven. I really believe in this project.
Nice.
And I think it's very important because, to be quite honest, I think there's a lot of piratas in Spanish. We call them pirates in the EU funding sector. Unfortunately, there's not a lot of diversity of biography of people who were beneficiaries of EU funding. It's very complex to receive EU funds. And I was looking over the regulation of the European Parliament and the Council of April 2021, establishing Horizon 2020, laying down the rules for participation dissemination. And it was quite interesting because it explains the political rationale behind why communication is very important. Because within the proposals, the innovation proposals, In my experience, communication and dissemination section is an afterthought. It's usually a kind of copy and paste boilerplate text. It can be quite good. And one of the I know we're going to talk about the challenges later, but
yeah, we'll get back to that.
One of the main challenges has been convincing people that they can improve upon what they're doing, because obviously people are winning proposals using the status quo, but I think we can create a better return on investment for the European Commission itself with regards to communication and dissemination, visibility, credibility, and all that good stuff.
Yes, and we'll get back to it because it's a very I like the approach. I like this course, but we'll get back to that just shortly. In the EU funding world, where have you mainly been? Have you been writing proposals, or have you been in? I know you work for the Commission, but
right. I was a stagiaire in 2004.
Okay.
Besides that, no, I haven't worked in the European Commission. I have been working as a consultant, like you.
Okay,
like you
so
were.
You've been writing. So you've been writing proposals.
Writing proposals, which I haven't done actually in a while. I kind of pivoted from that to reviewing proposals.
Good for you.
Yes, because I got very burnt out writing proposals.
That's why I stopped.
Yeah, that's why a lot of people stop. I think so. Either you have to have your own company and make the money yourself, or find some sort of niche for yourself. And so I kind of invented my position wherever I went, and that was the service that I offer. So I've read a lot of proposals, and I've seen a lot of the same kind of approaches and mistakes being made.
Oh yeah.
So honestly, I could put my comments in an Excel sheet and copy and paste them when I review proposals for clients. Because they're always the same. The first couple of pages has to be a compelling narrative, and that encapsulates the whole proposal, and then the rest is basically due diligence, checking boxes, and then there's the communication disseminations section, which is mostly boilerplate. It can be used. Most of the proposals that I review, there's nothing that's there. Those sections are generic. They could be used in any proposal. So if you have a section that could be used, that you could place in any proposal, I don't think that's good enough for the European Commission and the European taxpayers that are funding these innovation financing programs.
All right. Just to give you already, you actually talked. You have already explained the company and presented the organization. But so you're a one-man band.
No, we started 2 years ago, not even 2 years ago, in March of 2021, with 3 people, which is the legal minimum for to start an association in Spain, to register an association. So 2 of my colleagues and myself started this association. However, the idea was basically mine, in collaboration with my colleagues. I wrote our manifesto, which is essentially our website, explaining why we're doing what we're doing, because based on my experience in the EU funding sector, I was disappointed at how how a lot of the public money was being used, and I wouldn't say angry, but I was confused. I mean, a lot of money has been wasted, and this VC system is problematic. For a lot of different reasons. I don't know if you want me to get into that now. But basically, I won't get into that now.
Not too much. Just if it's relevant in relation to the company.
It's relevant to the reason why we founded More Perfect Union.
Yeah.
So to bring the citizens and the EU institutions together in real ways, pragmatic ways. Not inventing their own social media channels, but using Facebook, where 80% of the Europeans already are online, for example, as one example. Is using methodologies from the marketing, PR, advertising worlds, which are proven. Some of these techniques, focus groups, A/B testing, have been around for over 100 years. So we focus on using real-world methodologies and apply them to the communication and dissemination sections of EU-funded innovation projects and other types of funding programs as well.
Okay, so Erasmus that was about to be my question. So, which what funding areas are you moving within?
So because we're not a one-man band, but we're a four-man band basically. So it's taken, and I've been doing the majority of the work, and this has all been funded on my own dime. So we work with two part-time young women that are from my neighborhood in Barcelona, mm-hmm. that I hired from next door, mm-hmm. Because I know in Spain it's very difficult to get jobs when you're young and especially break into the NGO sector and the EU funding sector without advanced degrees, etc., which are not necessary. At least it wasn't in my case. Mm-hmm. So we basically just started applying for EU funding in September. We applied for this Innovation Action with a consortium of some 15 members, and we're applying to an Erasmus Plus program dealing with music.
Okay, that's nice.
So social inclusion and in the music industry.
All right, very well. Thanks for this. We will probably, because this is what it's all about. This is why you make the company. So what we're going to dig into is about your discourse. So we will now move into actually how you work as a company and so on. So mm-hmm. it's going to be this is a subject we will go into depth about this. So let's just hit the key content of this episode. Dissemination, communication, and exploitation section. The sections that have this included in the EU Horizon Europe proposals. Mm-hmm. If we just have a fly in here, so what are they? So they are in the main proposal, so to say, in excellence and impact. You have these elements you need to explain in the impact section, 2.2. Yeah. Measures to maximize impact. That's in this part you will need to explain. There's the second part of it. That's where you have to, in poetry, as I call it, explain your strategy within those three areas. And then you have in the where you roll out the actual activities of your work in the work package descriptions in the implementation section 3, where you have to explain concretely if you have websites, if you have dissemination, if you have focus groups, if you have, and how often they will meet, and so on and so forth, and where the concrete tasks. So those are the two areas. Those are the two written sections of the proposals where you have to deal with this.
And that's from the if I may, that's from the templates, because the evaluators evaluate based on the evaluation criteria, exactly, which is not the template. So actually the word communication, if I'm not mistaken, and I will double check right now, it doesn't appear in the evaluators criteria. However, obviously the evaluators are trained to look out for it, and they're used to the standard proposal template. But it's not actually one of the questions that they're asked to grade, let's say. I mean, it's part of the commercialization strategy, but they don't actually say communication in any part of the grading of the scoring documents, which they have to fill in.
I've been getting comments and deducting grades based on on this in my work package description and so on. So they might not formally have to deal with, but they do.
No, it's obviously very important. But my broader point is that if you have to prioritize between what's in the template and what's in the evaluator criteria, I would look at the evaluator criteria more than the template, because the evaluators are never asked to, they're never asked to grade you on how well you follow a template. Yeah. They don't know the template necessarily. They've never seen the template.
And this is a recurring thing with the guests I have on board. Often I've been having a handful of consultants on board, and people who have been doing this for many years. And the square root is evaluators' perception.
Correct.
Yeah. So that's I will also move into having episodes with having evaluators on board for these kind of circle around that area. So right. Yes. But indeed, yes.
So, I think the problem with communication and dissemination sections is the same problem that you see a lot in the business section, let's say. That, figures are presented without explanation of how, we arrived at these figures. There's no justification for why we're calculating what we're calculating. Stuff like that. We see a lot of tables with, predictions of how many Twitter followers we're going to have, and that means nothing without context, without a rationale about your communication strategy, who you want to talk to, why, when, how, and I believe for this that we should create a feedback loop for all stakeholders, including the general public and the EU officials who design these proposals, so that they design them better each time. And if we can, use the right communication channels, we can lobby to a certain extent the EU officials and keep them in the loop to the best practices, so that when they write the next tranche of calls for proposals, they'll be better designed proposals and grants. That's kind of what we're aiming towards. It's a more long-term goal, obviously, but I think you have to explain the rationale behind what you're talking about. I see all the time. I just see tables with numbers of like we'll have 500,000, 50,000 Twitter followers at year 2 and 500,000 at, and it's like, how do you know, and what are you basing this on? Why are you telling me this? How do you know that? Yeah. And that's something we see in the business case as well. And those are the two sections that I see that a lot, where this forecasts are not justified. And the business case, obviously, we know that 90% of these businesses fail. So that's just fairy tale land. But with communication strategy, you can make a more concrete forecast. Based on the reach that you have currently. If it's a consortium, how many, what kind of communication resources they have, and also I think it's very important to loop in the general public, because the truth of the matter is most people who are not involved in EU funding have no idea these funding programs even exist.
Yeah.
And I think that's a huge problem.
Yes, it is.
Yeah, but I think it's an existential problem.
Yeah. Before we go into to those details, let's just have a short talk about how it is normally approached, because now we've been mentioning it a couple of times about how proposal writers, both public, private universities, if you have a consultant on board to do this, how NGOs that have communications on board, their communication partners, they do this. I'm not talking about everybody. That should be clear. Of course, somebody, you have segments out there that are very good in developing this, but I've seen this. I have been in the business myself, and you have been in the business. So we're not just talking out of something out of the blue like this. We know what we're talking about. Common problem about these sections, especially where you can cut corners as a consultant. You copy paste text from winning proposals, and you adjust, remove. You run a search and replace on the acronym of the project, and then you might adjust a little bit with the poetry. But I have had managers that was using it as a strategy in the office they would give to clients, that they knew, but this is just that's a 1 day work developing, right. Which is, it tells a lot about how, and these are people that have been doing these working with these things for 20 years, and right. they seriously think that that's a good idea, a winning strategy to deal with it like this, which it's and I took color of it. So when I was sitting on it, because you're busy when you write proposals, right? So you have, it's not like you have all the time in the world to sit and think about.
I mean, the thing is,
philosophical elements. Things are fast. So yes, I can cut a corner here. So I'm going to cut a corner.
And if everybody does the same thing, they're right to a certain extent. Because if everybody has this low level in these sections of boilerplate text, and everybody uses the same kind of boilerplate text. Mm-hmm. They have to, the evaluators are still funding proposals. So that's one of the main challenges that we have had, is trying to change the client's perception of that it isn't a 1 day job. It isn't something that you get. And there's usually not, in consortium projects, for example, there's usually not a dedicated communication and dissemination partner. It's usually given to a university or somebody who, okay, I'll take it. You know what I mean? Take the 300,000 euros.
Yeah, that's not the experience I've been having. Okay. Normally, the DCE partners would have been innovation clusters, or they would have been used to doing this. The proposals I have been building up, but there's also a lot. There's the whole industry of organizations that wants to do dissemination, communication, and exploitation work, because that's right. What they're, you have all these associations within the specific socioeconomic area you write proposal in. You always have organizations, innovation clusters, industrial associations that have no money. Yeah, they some of them, if they're industrial, they might be lucky they have a good funding from members, but you always have these kind of associations or clusters that it's not like they're tight on money, and they fund the desk, so to say, with project funding. So they sort of run after as many projects as they can within this, because they know they can do a copy paste job.
Yeah, because whatever they are doing is not working, obviously, because according to what the European Commission wants, its political rationale, which I have the text right here. Mm-hmm. They are not getting a good return on investment for their money. It's these companies are charging a lot of money and not doing a very thorough job. They just throw together a website and a couple of social media accounts, and that's it. But this is a full-time job in a 2-year project, I believe.
Now, I've just for the sake of example, just open up one of the proposals I've been working on, submitted. It was a non-winning one. I think we got 14 points, I think. So it was fairly well written, but not top. And if I look, but it's a good example of the sections here. So it's you have some tables, with the instruments, and then short section are quite long tables there. And then you have a little bit of short text of describing the strategy. Mm-hmm. But it's because it's done. It's.
Do you think you could? Is it specific to that project, or is it something you could take and put in another project, and it would also make sense in another project?
But that's what we did.
That's a good indication, basically, of kind of low quality. You know what I mean? At least as far as the European Commission is concerned, or should be concerned.
What I tried to, because it was some of the things that some of these sections. I'm not a proposal writer, but these are some of the things that I was involved in. And so I would have a colleague that would been writing it out, and then I would review it and maybe adjust and so on. But you know what? It's there's a generic element to it. it's what often happens, and this is, I think, is the most important message to the listeners, that it's so easy to fall into the trap of generic text that you can, in the lingo of the EU proposal lingo, you know it, Sean. Yeah? It's because you review proposals, so you see it all the time. There is a lingo, and you get into that, and there's a certain logic in when you fall into this trap of how the sections go and how you describe things. So where if you really have a marketing specialist to look at this, at the whole thing, the whole proposal, excellence, what is it you're actually doing? We need to develop how would you do a strategy with this? They would say, but it's not, it's like it's disconnected, or it's not like it's really, it's not real. And now it was always a thought I had when I did proposals, that I never had the time to read the excellence section properly. You understand? Because I was so busy. So I never had the time to read and understand completely also the work package descriptions like this, everything, to have a full picture, to make a nice customized dissemination communication exploitation plan. It was always falling back on generic text that we would try to make quality. You understand? It's not like we didn't try it. It's
right. Of course,
we would try to make it a quality text, but So
I think personalization is something that's hugely important in writing proposals in general. In the first couple of pages, if you can tell the origin story of the consortium or of the technology or of the people behind it, especially with these top-down proposals, where you're specifically responding to a call, where the need is already explained. If the evaluator can even remember and distinguish your proposal from the other ones, you're already winning. You know what I mean? And a great way to do that is to personalize and talk about the teams, and because we're talking about very high-level experts in their fields, and if you can talk about their experience and use their names and the companies they've worked in and talk about their experience, that's hugely compelling, and that can be applied throughout the proposal process with communications and dissemination. I think the problem is, honestly, the first time I did this, I Googled digital marketing strategy. Like I said, we're not a marketing company. We believe that we can improve dramatically upon the status quo, and there's tons of information out there about how to create a communication strategy. It's cost effective, that reaches all the people you need to reach, that you explain the rationale behind why you're doing what you're doing, how are you going to do it, when you're going to do it, how much it's going to cost, who you need to subcontract. Because another thing that's important is to intelligent workers understand that they don't do everything themselves. They're not experts in everything. You know what I mean? So when you can ask for help and get a better result, you should. Yeah, and that's something that I think is missing too at the institutional level for sure, and also at the consultant level.
Let's because you bridged already now into what. So let's just hit at the really really nice content here. That because now we had a fly in. We had to talk about what normally happens and what the problem is, why that is happening. So let's just. Your approach, Sean. Now you started it, so let's just dig into it. So you already shared a little bit with us your overall discourse, the whole reason, because it's the whole reason why you funded the association that you have there. So the overall discourse, just. In relation to what we're talking about here, how you work with developing these sections of the proposals when you're involved.
Okay. So the first thing that I address is the rationale behind how we're doing how we've decided on the communication strategy, who we need to talk to and why, and link it to the political rationale and the requirements of the European Commission. And they're very specific. Well, the Parliament passed the law discussing, and if you don't mind, I'm just going to read textually. Mm-hmm. For example, this Article 20 of this regulation regarding the Horizon Europe and participation, dissemination, etc. Right. Evidence shows that embracing diversity in all senses is key to doing good science, as science benefits from diversity. Diversity and inclusiveness contribute to excellence in collaborative R&I. Okay, these are words that are thrown around a lot without a lot of thought or importance getting to them. But we know that diversity really is important in science, for example. In artificial intelligence, the artificial intelligence will be as biased as the human who created the original algorithm or is feeding the inputs. And that's something, diversity, and I'm not just talking about like ethnic diversity or minority quotas. I'm talking about diversity of biography. The beneficiaries of most of the European innovation programs tend to be highly educated, ethnically European. They tend to study similar things at the same universities. And, according to the European Commission, that's a problem. So how can we increase diversity? Well, the easiest way is to talk to the general public, because they're certainly diverse and they don't even know what's going on.
Mm-hmm.
Yep. So I think the first thing is looping in, the main goal is that the rationale is to create a feedback loop so that every time a new grant program is designed, it's better than the last one. Mm-hmm. Because they go on to say that every 4 years, they have to, in Article 52, program evaluation, that they should, and every 4 years, they need to evaluate the results of their innovation programs. And honestly, I've never seen any of these evaluations. Transparency is very important. So with regards to the communication and dissemination section in particular, diversity, we need to reach out to the general public and to all of the stakeholders in a real way. You can't just make a website and create a Twitter account and a Facebook account and expect people to come to you. You need to find the audience where they are. Mm-hmm. And that's critical to communication in general. Because I see sometimes on LinkedIn, people will be like, we need to create a European Facebook. And, there is a European Facebook and it's called Facebook. 80% of the Europeans are on Facebook and use it daily. So why create? There's this kind of if we build it, they will come. Dream, among the institutional elite about communications. That's not how communications work. People are already out talking, communicating. People communicate all the time, and they're online, and you can find them, and very easy. So what we do is we would explain that, and then we would also take pre-deadline commercial activities, like I was describing, LinkedIn advertising, which is very expensive, but you could target it very specifically to the profiles of evaluators, and do this kind of video series like I did with this last proposal that we submitted in September, which is the reason that you contacted me. Mm-hmm. For I think a couple of thousand euros, we had over 80,000 engagements with LinkedIn users with profiles of evaluators, mm-hmm. 20,000 views of the videos themselves. So it's a highly successful campaign, and it's something that, as far as I know, is not done or has never been done. And actually, in the consortium, nobody wanted to chip in. I paid for it myself. I was happy to do it because it was part of us demonstrating, that these kind of commercial marketing techniques are useful within the European funding ecosystem. Mm-hmm. So first is the rationale, and then When it comes to the tables, I think we should get rid of or combine the stakeholder table and the projections of usually there's like a stakeholder table. I see a lot of stakeholder tables, like who are the stakeholders involved that you need to make this project. And then there'll be another table with these random projections that are kind of floating with no context. You can put those together and say with stakeholders, okay, so for scientific stakeholders, peer-reviewed journals, we're going to reach them through Twitter because that's where they tend to live. LinkedIn, institutionally, also LinkedIn, Twitter, and then for younger demographics, Instagram, TikTok. It depends what the proposal is about. A lot of the proposals now, thankfully, are about about addressing the climate crisis, which young people are hugely interested in. So this is a very great way. It's a huge opportunity for the European Commission to communicate with its citizens and future voters about what they're doing to address the climate crisis through innovation funding.
And here so one of the reasons why I got intrigued with your approach and talk we had some weeks ago is exactly this, because this is a square root problem for the Commission. It throws tons of money after all kinds of research and innovation projects to realize a political goal within the different economic and socioeconomic areas. But nobody knows. Yeah. And so there's a huge gap between the political will, which is strong, when you throw that much taxpayers' money after these things, right? Then a huge program as just the Horizon Europe, but if you also look at the LIFE program, Erasmus, you have so much money, political money, being thrown after ecosystems, both public, private, NGOs, within all spheres of society. And few people know what's going on in the other real world. And this, so from your I don't know, anger, or from your
passion,
social indignation or whatever over this, this is a real problem. And I like that you made an association to try to get to address these things also down at the proposal level, to say, look, let's change things in real proposals, in real projects like that. Money, try to use the marketing strategies that you just said. You've been using these strategies. Some of them are 100 years old. How to engage with the public, how to spread the news about what you're doing, and how to do this. So yes, there is a fundamental problem between those two sides. That is, it's, if you can solve that, the Commission they're going to carry you in a golden chair for the rest of your life.
Well, let's see. I don't know. They don't like to give out credit, really, but I mean, the good thing about our approach, I think, is the useful thing about our approach is that it can be applied in any sector. So that has been a learning experience for us, because there's a lot more money in the innovation funding than there is in social funding. But a lot more.
Indeed.
And in innovation, they don't talk about the fact that practically every single technology that they're proposing has some sort of automation, artificial intelligence, that could very probably wipe out entire sectors of the workforce. And on the social side, they don't talk about that either. They don't mention technology ever, or maybe they mention the fact that, there's going to be disruption in the, like the digital industrial revolution or whatever you want to call it. But we have the luxury of being to predict disaster. That's like, can you imagine? I mean, with all the the rise of the extreme right in Europe right now and all over the world, that's appalling to me. The progressives have given the populist vote away, and we have nobody to blame but ourselves. So I think this is an existential problem. We need the buy-in of the public. They need to know that the European Union is founded as a peace project, and it has tangible benefits for its citizens. And young people are a lot more aware than my generation certainly was about the environment, for example.
Yeah.
Social justice, but it seems like the left hand doesn't know what the right hand's doing as far as the whole ecosystem of EU funding, and I find that worrying. Because it could be, I would maybe, if I was designing a funding program, to pair funding programs, for example, if you're proposing a technology that will, in all likelihood, if it's adopted at a large scale, will decimate an entire sector of the workforce. Well, we should be doing pilot programs of universal basic income, reinsertion laboral, work. Sorry, it's coming out in Spanish, but like workplace reinsertion, other approaches. I'm a proponent of universal basic income personally, but there's lots of approaches that we should be testing out right now, because we know that this wave of destruction is coming, and it's supported by the European Union taxpayers, who are going to be screwed by it. If we don't test out on the social side policies that will help us, make this transition to wherever we're going. Maybe it's not that drastic as I'm imagining. Who knows? But
the Commission is actually doing. That's right. I have a lot of opinions about the Commission's approach to this, but my baseline is that they're actually doing a huge good work in trying to understand how they can avoid social problems, how they can avoid energy poverty, how they can avoid climate problems, how they can there is actually a real will and to also to spread the money and try to understand and trying to put up walls against that tide within the different problems that we can see that comes.
Right. I mean, I believe that. Because when I worked when I did my internship in the European Commission, I had nothing but respect for my colleagues there. I think they're true believers.
Yep.
I found that everybody worked in good faith. I got along with everybody. I really appreciate the hard work of the European Union institutional officials. But the problem with innovation grants is they don't talk about this problem in the projects, in the proposals for innovation.
They ride up against the context.
Or at least I haven't seen any that have, they talk about the benefits of, other, broader benefits for society about certain technologies, but they don't talk about negative potential benefits for society and how the consortium thinks that they should, tackle this problem. That's not really the job of the consortium. It's the job of the Commission.
Sean,
I would argue.
I want to put you a little bit on the spot.
Okay.
How do you do it? So let's just when you're a project partner, you are responsible for sitting and developing together with some other partners the dissemination, communication, exploitation section, and the VP description on that work package. How are you approaching that? How are you doing that differently than what we just talked about some 30 minutes ago about just doing everything as you used to do and copy paste remote posts and so on. So with having in mind what you just said with the trying to get a deep digging a layer deeper understanding. So how do you inject that into your proposal writing?
That's a good question, because I thought about that, because it's really not that different at the end of the day. I've seen very good boilerplate texts that deal with the communication dissemination that can pass. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
However, I think the most important thing is personalization and talking about the rationale and having a broader European goal, a European dimension, which is a feedback loop, so that we keep getting better and better and better at spending public money.
You need to do that more concrete. You need to make this more concrete.
Okay, so I would start. Honestly, I would start the section with a paragraph about that. I would say the European Commission, in its by the Parliament's declaration of blah blah blah, in Article 51 says, that in order for union funding to have the greatest possible impact and make the most effective contribution to the European policy objectives and commitments, it should be possible for the union to enter into partnerships with private and/or public sector partners, such as NGOs, research universities, and that's where we introduce ourselves. We're an NGO, mission-driven, nonprofit. Those are differentiators that are value added for the proposal. And then we would just get to the red meat, based on our internal research. For example, using influencers is a great way social media influencers on Instagram and TikTok is a great way to engage the public.
That's connecting to the real world, influencers.
Yeah. We did it cost us 2,000 euros, and we hired a very, very popular Chinese Catalan influencer for the EU initiative, Discover EU, in which they give Interrail tickets to 90 university students in Europe, and it's a great tangible benefit that shows you how awesome Europe is. Basically, it's great fun. When you're that age, traveling around in trains. That's what I did when I came to Europe, and it was the time of my life. And Spain, and within one day, I know the EC also had their their in-house, or I don't know, their own social media or their own influencers. But this guy, he got 300,000 views in 24 hours. Spain was by far the member state that applied most to Discover EU. Of course, we contacted the European Commission many, many times, and they never got back to us to confirm, because we chose this influencer because he only posted in Catalan. So we could see by the IP addresses if the majority of the applications were coming from the Spanish region of Catalonia. Mm-hmm. But so I can't confirm or deny. I don't have any proof that we impacted that, but certainly that's a way to. And you can see that on our website, the actual videos. He's a funny guy. This works. You know what I mean? And people are realizing this. And obviously, it's not for all.
No, that's a segment.
Audiences, yeah, that's a segment. So you have that segment, the general public who needs to know, because they're paying for it, and the consequences will be fallen on their shoulders. The young people.
So if we take general public, that's a painful one always, because people so we will make a Facebook group, or we will approach local media, or we will try to get on radio shows that.
I don't know. It's all that sounds to me like. Doesn't sound very convincing to me.
Exactly.
Yeah, I mean, it's almost like until a couple of years ago, I still would see like CD-ROMs. We need money for posters and CD-ROMs. You can imagine that. No, we need to get real. Everybody's on TikTok now.
So what would in your trend? So how would you approach the general public in a proposal text? What would be your approach for that? Now we're talking about TikTok.
Yeah. I would ask for 2,000 euros to hire a social media. Well, okay. So if we're doing like a EIC accelerator, for example,
yep.
It's just one beneficiary. I would hire. I would ask for maybe 6,000 euros to do 3 full day recordings with a social media influencer of our choice, because it's very important who you choose. That it's not it's somebody who's entertaining and that the kids like, you know what I mean? And it doesn't have to be about politics, and it shouldn't be actually. They shouldn't be the influencers that tend to talk about politics are kind of boring, So you want to find the influencers who talk about makeup or music or movies
related to the topic of the proposal.
Absolutely. But because kids are interested in everything, But the people with the most reach, you have to go where the people are already. Mm-hmm. So you go to the influencers who you like the best, who you can tell are you need to talk to them and see if they really believe in solving the climate crisis, for example, or whatever the goal of the project is, and if you have some kind of a vibe with them, and then pay them to plug your project and get people aware of European funding, and then you'll see that people will start asking questions. Well, how can I get European funding? And that's a very good idea. Why am I not getting European funding? That's an even better question. And then so just by combining the stakeholder and the kind of social media projection tables, you save space, and you can explain why you're targeting the scientific community on Twitter, the sector, whatever it might be, on Instagram, for example, or Facebook, which is actually the most popular social media channel.
What I think you do, because I'm trying here to put a left eye on the proposal, just for the example, all right, to see what I threw in, and so you mash everything into a table, and social media platforms. It's an extreme simple text. You're saying proactive use of social media networks, LinkedIn, YouTube, Twitter, etc. for distributing content. And then now I'm just reading what we wrote in this proposal.
Okay.
Yeah. So and that's that. So my best guess is that how you do this, you fold it. You are folding it up. No, you have no matter the platform. Yeah, you have the platforms you would need that you think is fitting for the proposal. You're dealing with the segments that you're approaching.
Yeah.
But you would fold out a coherent poetry text on how this strategy would be used.
Yeah, and why.
Yeah.
Yeah. Because there's lots of facts and figures. The evaluators love facts and figures. You can say why. The intelligentsia is on Twitter, and but it's not real life. Most people are on Facebook. The kids are on TikTok. And then explain what you're going to talk about as well, like the milestones. So, and also with the website. Website's not just something you create and, hire a domain for 2 years and that's it. So a website is something that you have to update according to how the project is progressing.
Yeah.
And I would argue that we should, in the proposal, and even before submitting the proposal, try to find other people that are applying to the same call, and talk to them about how to communicate better about this, and find people on the social in the social grant side that are working, that are dealing with social exclusion and marginalized communities that might be very affected by wide scale automation, and start that process before you do because you write the proposal, because evaluators like to see that you're not just waiting for manna from heaven. You know what I mean? That you actually you believe in what you're doing and you're doing something already. You know what I mean? That you're going to do it with or without the EU's money. That's your goal. You want to do something because you believe in it.
Yeah.
And you're going to do it with or without the European Union's money. The European Union's money would help a lot to make it faster, make it more efficient, and in line with their missions, etc. So, apart from that, it's not very different. It's just a matter of I never use the acronyms of the. Just give an example. I never use the acronyms to the extent possible of the beneficiary, the participants in the project. Mm-hmm. I think that's nobody can memorize the University of
20
parts. West Macedonia, and then so it's like UWCS, and it's like just write it out. The things with acronyms drives me crazy. Acronyms and jargon absolutely drives me crazy.
So that's what you get.
If it's not a general. Yeah, no, and sometimes you have to. I mean, if you're writing about neural networks, or like machine learning, you don't want to be writing or digital twinning. That's what we were doing this proposal on last time. And actually, I did write out digital twinning, but there was another one that was longer. So you don't want to be writing out these long technical terms. You can use an acronym. Spell it out the first time and then use it. if it's being used like every page. But if it's not a general knowledge acronym, just spell it out. I read so many first pages that it's just full of acronyms. It's like, what is this? What are you talking about? It breaks up the text. It's the jargon. It's horrible. And so, I just try to personalize everything, and whenever I can, work in to whatever section I'm dealing with. So if it's the communication dissemination section, I try to work in specific personal details about the team. For example, the University of Western Macedonia has a communications department that had, a very successful communications campaign about one thing or another, last year. I would mention that these projections are based on this campaign that they did. Leave a link so they can go see it. So it's actually like you're giving evidence. It's all about proving your point, and not just kind of throwing numbers at the walls without context, in my opinion.
Do you, in the proposals you've been involved in, do you also put in communication, dissemination, exploitation elements into the first 2 pages of the full proposal?
Well, exploitation, yes. Communication as such, no. First of all, the communication dissemination in the English language, these are synonyms. There's no difference between communication and dissemination.
Nobody will ever European Union language, they are different.
I know. I don't care. Nobody will ever convince me that there's a difference between communication and dissemination, because they are exact same thing.
It's because it's a different language.
I know it is different language, but if we're going to speak in English, which is what we want to speak in, let's speak in English. You know what I mean? Although languages do evolve, but communication dissemination, come on, you know what I mean? Exploitation is different, because that's selling something.
You've been inside the system, so you know that you might have English as the main language, but there's a French understanding of many things, because that's how they built up the bureaucratic model of the European Commission. So there's a lot of that that is, and then it sieves in together to kind of make a two-headed monster of the EU lingo.
No, I think I'm a big proponent of plain English. There's this movement of plain English, and I think people need to get over jargon, get over acronyms, and just speak like human beings that want to convey a message in the most clear and concise way possible. And that's what we're all about.
That's one of the actually I agree with you. Here you have something that's one of the elements that keeps the barrier between the two worlds of EU projects and the real world. That it's the way you talk on the one side in the EU funding world is something that you don't understand really on the other side. It's considered bollocks, It's considered
absolutely, totally. And the funding. The application processes are so complex that you have this consultant class, to which I belong. That is another barrier to diversity, certainly, because if you don't have resources to hire somebody like me, you're not going to be able to write this proposal yourself. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
And the EC does say, again, I'm quoting, that diversity and inclusiveness contribute to excellence in collaborative R&I. Collaboration across disciplines, sectors, and throughout the ERA makes for better research and higher quality project proposals. Can lead to higher rates of societal take-up and can foster the benefits of innovation, thus advancing Europe. Those are their words, not mine. So, so that goes back to the rationale. I think we should always start with the political rationale of what we're doing. When we're telling this story, and then it really is like a storytelling task. It has to have, and I know you've talked about this, before, but it has to have a narrative thread, that you can follow while you're still, checking off the boxes of the evaluation criteria. But yeah, if you can make it as personal as possible, people remember. They remember names, they remember experiences, they remember some guy worked for NASA, or whatever. Instead of just the UWCS partner UWCS. instead of Mr. John, Mr. John Worth, like the director of, um, something fancy.
Yeah. Sean, we're slowly moving into the last part of this podcast. But before we move into the end, I want to ask you a little bit about this more professional business marketing thinking. So have you shared with us how you are dealing with that, applying that to your when you are making a strategy for a proposal? Are you digging into using models of professional marketing, business marketing, or
Sure, absolutely. Oh yeah, I mean that's what we did. And we do like A/B testing. We want to even take it further and do focus groups and stuff once we have, because we just started applying for funding.
Yeah.
We just had our first application in September.
So focus groups.
Focus groups, A/B testing.
A/B testing meaning
test that when you test a message, like to see which one resonates better with the consumer.
Okay.
Basically, with communication as it deals with exploitation, if you will. It's all about the end user, the whoever buys it. You have to explain why the customer. Like why are they buying this? That's the most important question of any commercial proposal. Like why are they going to buy this technology or this solution? What's wrong with the state of the art, and like how do you know they're going to buy yours, even though it's better commercially or technically, for example, doesn't mean they're going to buy your solution. That's where communication comes in, and these marketing techniques come in. That's how they sell stuff. You know what I mean? That's why the Americans are so good at this. The Americans, that's why the Europeans are always kind of like, we need to do this better, because the Europeans are the world leaders in fundamental research, but they can't sell stuff because they lack that creative spark. I don't want to make broad generalizations. So I grew up in the United States. I'm half European, but my Europeanness is on a piece of paper. I identify, even though it's the place I've lived least, I identify culturally, I guess, more with the United States because my mother was from there, but my father was Irish. He was always an Irish citizen. I'm kind of like the European, like a proto-European. I'm the real pan-European because I don't have any national. I don't have any like. I'm not patriotic.
Yeah, so
anywhere,
you don't have a specific country where you feel it.
No. Okay. Yeah, I've been. So, with regards to selling anything, it's all about going to the consumer and asking them if they would buy this and why. And you can take that to a scale. You spend as much money on that kind of on these kind of activities as you want. But that's something that's often missing. There's like, well, because engineers tend to be like, well, it's obviously the best. It's obviously the highest technical. So, highest quality technical solution there is. It's the most cutting edge technology there is. That doesn't mean people will buy it. There's the classic, Harvard Business School case study of the VHS and Betamax. Betamax was a lot higher quality video, but VHS recorded longer, and that's what the consumers wanted to use it for.
Yep.
So that's where as far as communication, that's where I build the basis of the business plan is all around the consumer.
Now, so now I'm gonna because I'm geeky enough to know a little bit about the consultancy company I work for. We had very strong business models and market analysis plans that we would apply to the proposals we were involved in if they were innovation actions. But my question for you is, so let's just, if it's not related to selling a product, if so, gets where I'm going? So if it's
no,
about selling something, using the selling approach,
yeah,
in a more soft project, is that what you do?
yeah. I don't touch the financial forecasts at all. First of all, because they're usually just invented. You know what I mean? They're reverse engineered usually, or at least with a lot of the consultants I've worked with. The best consultants usually just reverse engineer them to kind of like fit into the parameters of where the commission wants to see the projections, because we know they're 90% are going to fail. So this is just la land. These financial projections, I would leave them out entirely if it was up to me. I mean, you want to define the market, obviously. That's real. That's something you can do. You want to define why the consumer will purchase your product. That's something you can prove, you can demonstrate. But the financial forecasts, I mean, that's just 90% of those are like not intentionally, but they're lies. You know what I mean? They're just made up. So I don't touch that. So we don't touch that. We concentrate on getting the word out about the project, what it's about, why it exists, and trying to, from our side, from More Perfect Union, what we want to do is we want to feed more people with this European pie, and feed different kinds of people, and make it a lot easier to feed them. I'd say.
Breaking down, so what I had an interview with an episode with journalists where we talked about breaking on to the other side, so to say, how he worked as a journalist with proposals. He's like how to because like that. So you're also working on that wall,
yeah.
To break on through to the real world on the other side. So yeah, it's I have a lot of sympathy for that. I think we should slowly start to wrap it up, Sean, because it's just going to get too long. And we covered very well how you're working and this approach. It's been lovely.
Yes. Lovely. Well, thank you so much. Thank you so much for inviting me. This is my first podcast.
Before we wrap it up, I always have a segment that I call the toughest challenge.
Yes.
So from your point of view, the toughest challenge of working the way you do. Yeah. Mm-hmm. So this approach that you have to dissemination, communication, exploitation, when you work in writing and implementing the project afterwards. What is the toughest challenge in order to get this right?
Well, I would say it's not so much the writing as it is convincing people that they can do this part better and that they should do this part better. Oh. It's actually finding clients, getting people to hire us, essentially.
Because they've
been winning proposals for 15 years or however many years using the same boilerplate text. So why should they change? Even though we're cheaper, even though we're more, even though we're based on real world methodologies, even though we're mission driven, even though we're nonprofit, people don't care. They don't care. There's so many people that do not care about the misuse of public funds. And that for me is the most challenging thing. And also it's hard for me to not get indignant about that sometimes,
Yeah.
And I have to work on that, because, I'm not going to catch a lot
clients
of
by getting angry,
by insulting them, because insulting their character, but I want to desperately. So that's for me, that's the biggest challenge. And it is a challenge, but I think we can slowly educate. And also, we are a nonprofit, and we have statutory responsibilities to share the information. We don't have any IPR. We don't have any proprietary knowledge. We want to share everything. We want people to copy us. But we want to be able to say we were there at first, and we're going to do it better.
Yeah. Nice, Sean. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Niels.
I'm just gonna have a
pleasure.
Likewise. I'm just gonna have a short fly out, take off, wrap up before we fully end here. So, dear listeners, thank you so much for listening to the end. This has been a lovely talk with Sean. As you all know, or if you're first-time listeners, I have a website called thegrand.eu. That's where you can find all my episodes. This should be around 30th. I'm not perfectly sure which number this exact episode has, but as I speak, I have 26 episodes out. I have one per week. So you can find everything on my website. There you will also find, I'm trying to create a hub of information I gather throughout all these episodes. There are lots of organization that gathers information, and I also start to link to them because I'm not in competition. I'm an independent, non-commercial guy here doing spare time. I just want people to find the easiest way to find the information they need to make life just a little bit easier writing proposals. So that's what you will find in there. And please, for Christ's sake, as I say every time, almost in my episodes, subscribe to the email list, because that's the best way for me. If you find any sympathy with what I'm doing, and if you want to see me grow with this initiative, subscribe to the email list, because that's the best way for any podcast to grow in this world. So please, by all means, I'm not spamming you. You just receive an email every week. So again, thanks for listening to the end. Sean, again, thanks for coming around the virtual podcast studio. And you and me, we can put a teaser out here for the listeners. You and me, we will talk a little bit about. We talked about having an episode on more opinionated, because people can hear from this episode, you have opinions about things.
I have lots.
Yeah, and so we will have an episode that's a little bit more colored than this.
Yeah.
So we will just arrange. That's probably going to be in 2023, but as timing is. But the future is long, as I always say. So
hopefully, yeah. Well, thank you so much, Niels. It's been a pleasure.
The pleasure is all mine. Thank you so much. Bye.
Okay. Bye-bye.
The Grand. You have been listening to The Grand, the EU funding podcast.